From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew. A handshake in California sends shockwaves to the South China Sea as Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen meets with the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy.
I believe our bond is stronger now than at any time or point in my lifetime.
Our Anne-Marie Herdarn is live at the scene and will bring us highlights from that meeting. Plus, more on the fallout from former President Donald Trump's indictment on 34 felony counts.
We today uphold our solemn responsibility to ensure that everyone stands equal before the law.
What it all means for the political landscape and the outlook for 2024, Joe.
That's all still ahead. First, we begin in Simi Valley today in California, where Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Herdarn joins us now from the Reagan Presidential Library. Anne-Marie, just on the heels of this meeting between Kevin McCarthy and the president of Taiwan, we've got a headline on the terminal: no current plans to visit Taiwan. Is that what the speaker has to show for this?
Yeah, that's what he's saying. This meeting largely symbolic, but remember, Joe, what we had after Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taipei last year. McCarthy came out and said if he's going to be speaker, he would like to make that same exact trip. What you saw is that Washington, Taipei, they clearly wanted to bring the temperature down with this visit, and that is why it's happening on U.S. soil. But it's still unprecedented. Speaker McCarthy is the highest-ranking U.S. official to ever meet a Taiwanese president on American soil, and he's also come out and talked about arms sales going to Taiwan on a timely basis. This was the most controversial part of the trip for Tsai Ing-wen. Remember, the White House has really been going through pains to try to make sure they are projecting to the world, most notably Beijing, that the Taiwanese president is just transiting through the United States. But this was a clear show of bipartisanship. They're now having a press conference where you have Republicans and Democrats. And it's, as you know, it's very hard to find a lot of things that both Democrats and Republicans can agree on in Washington.
How true.
Well, Anne-Marie, you mentioned how the White House has been trying to play this down, play it cool to some degree, and yet there is still so much conversation and clearly a belief on the China side that we are seeing a shift underway in the one China policy. How successfully can they push back against that when President Biden himself is changing his language around defending Taiwan a bit?
Yeah, President Biden on a number of occasions has come out and said they would for sure defend Taiwan, and then his team had to walk it back and say the one China policy has not changed. We've had statements from China's embassy in Washington, in L.A. The one in L.A. was the consulate telling Speaker McCarthy he's playing the, quote, Taiwan card. An email sent out to the congressmen and women who are here at the Reagan Library from the Washington Embassy in China saying that this meeting in itself is against the policy. And we should also note, at this venue, there has been a plane circling around the library in the valley that says only one China. Taiwan is not part of that, and there's been dueling protests outside as well. So obviously this is an issue, and the war and of words and the rhetoric, that will continue following this meeting.
All right, Anne-Marie, great reporting from out there in California. Thank you so much. Now, joining us around the table today to continue this conversation are Bloomberg's Nancy Cook, as well as our executive editor, Michael Shepard. So, Mike, if I could just start with you on that point we were just speaking with Anne-Marie about, this one China policy and whether or not that is still the policy. How much success has this White House and really just the U.S. at large had in messaging that to China?
They have had greater difficulty in messaging that over the past year, in particular since then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi made her visit to Taiwan and met with President Tsai, and that prompted a furious reaction. You'll remember from Beijing at the time, they conducted military drills, missile tests, and that prompted Biden to reiterate his point that they would defend Taiwan in a way that we hadn't really heard before, and maybe removing a little bit of that strategic ambiguity.
Let's hear from Speaker McCarthy a bit earlier today in California.
The friendship between the people of Taiwan and America is a matter of profound importance to the free world, and it is critical to maintain economic freedom, peace, and regional stability.
So, Michael, as we consider the effort here that went into this, the White House twisting itself into a pretzel to not call it a visit, now there's no trip to Taiwan. What has this visit actually done, if anything, to our relationship with Beijing?
Well, if you listen to the two leaders who met today, they will say that it just signals the importance of relations between both sides. And the significance for the U.S. is this. President Biden has been continuing the push that we saw started under Donald Trump against China, really trying to challenge China's economic rise. And one area in particular has been in the area of semiconductors. And the Biden administration has put into place a number of policies seeking to wean the U.S. away from any sort of dependence on China in this area. And of course, Taiwan is one of the world's top producers of the most advanced chips out there. So you can see this relationship playing out, and the administration is trying to restrict China from gaining access to technology that would allow it to compete, to allow China, that is, to compete with China on semiconductor manufacturing. And that is an irritant with Beijing for sure.
Yeah, and of course, that's not an agenda that the Biden administration has had to push alone or even just with the Democratic Party. China is one of perhaps the few areas of bipartisanship that you can find here in Washington now. How important is that, the fact that we have now had both Republicans and Democrats of exact same stature meeting with President Tsai?
Well, I think that the Democrats have really, rushed, particularly since President Biden has been, in office, to show that they are as tough on China as President Trump was. You know, it's sort of a new area of policy that really came to the forefront when Trump was president, and it's something that President Biden has sought to continue with the tariffs, with the policy towards Taiwan, to show that both parties are willing to really stand up to China.
I want to ask you about Donald Trump coming off of last night. And of course, you know, he loves digging into the China issue, but we didn't hear, I think, even a reference to it last night. We heard a lot about Donald Trump in this speech. It went short. I would say it was not high energy. I don't want to use the wrong term. And it was kind of a different feel in the room. Strange night to have a celebration on the unprecedented indictment of a former president. But is that the Trump we're going to get for the balance of this campaign, the more somber, sort of all about me approach?
Well, I think that what I was struck by in the speech last night, which, as you're right, was short, it was only 21 minutes long, was that it was really a list of grievances and the grievances against him. That's something that he's harped on for a long time, but it's also something that has been very successful for him. And, you know, you may have thought it was low energy, but Republicans this week have rushed to defend him, and there is sort of a universal sense on the Republican side that the indictment is very politically motivated, and the Trump campaign is really trying to use the momentum from this widespread sense that it's politically motivated, and his rivals and critics in the 2024 race have had to say that, to fundraise, to gain a foothold in the polling, and to really position himself as the dominant frontrunner within the GOP field.
Yeah, and let's hear a few of those specific words that he used to really further that narrative last night. Just take a listen to the former president.
And I never thought anything like this could happen in America. Never thought it could happen. The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it.
So, Mike, it raises a question. He's saying that this never should have happened in America. Clearly, he is trying to message to his base, this is wrong, I've been wrongly accused, nothing happened. And we know that the president's base, a certain portion of them, usually sticks with him. Many of them bought that the 2020 election was stolen. So I just wonder how much that message is resonating with the rest of the electorate who he's going to need if he wants the White House again in 2024.
Well, that is the huge challenge, Kayleigh, for Trump, because what he will need to do is not only win the primary, but try to take whatever message he is crafting now into the general election, and that is where he runs the risk of hitting into a wall. We saw that in the 2022 midterm elections, where Republican candidates, a number of them who were backed by Trump in competitive districts, really ended up struggling as a result.
Nancy, you were down in Florida not that long ago. It's just a couple of weeks, and how the narrative has changed is remarkable. It was all about Ron DeSantis. sanctimonious. Donald Trump seemed to be on his heels a bit. But the numbers that we've seen just in the last 10 days since the idea of this indictment emerged have been stark. Now that the governor of Florida is back from the book tour, does he put his heels up for a while, or does he need to keep making noise to stay in the media? How do you gauge this, knowing he's not officially a candidate?
Well, I think that what the DeSantis camp wants to do is really stay the course, finish out the book tour, finish out the legislative session in Florida, and then, as the sources tell me, that he's still planning to stick with the plan to declare. I think that the tricky part for them is they have not figured out really how to successfully message against Trump and deal with his attacks. That's something that we've seen them really struggle with on things like, what the governor thinks of the war in Ukraine, what he thinks of entitlement programs. They've really struggled to deal with the Trump attacks, and I think that that's something that they'll continue to face. And then now, on top of that, they're also facing a real race for donors. Donors are now saying, maybe Trump will be the front runner. Maybe we should sort of cool our heels and wait to see what happens. And the DeSantis camp is aware of that, and they feel like, they may not raise as much money in the next month or so. Longer term, as Mike said, that's sort of a different story.
Yeah, right.
But for the next month, sources have said to me, Trump's indictment really blots out the sun for the other candidates.
How about that? But he's still planning to run. That's what you're reporting.
Yes.
It's really important. Many thanks to Nancy Cook, and endorsements today. Yeah, from sitting members of Congress. Nancy Cook and Executive Editor Michael Shepard. Great to have both of you with us, as always. Appreciate the insights. Coming up, we're going to dive into China-U.S. relations and what we learned today following this meeting with retired General Charles Krulak. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
Should the leader of Taiwan engage with the Congress Speaker McCarthy during her transit in the U.S., it will be another provocation that seriously violates the One China principle, damages China's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and undermines peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. We firmly oppose this and will take resolute countermeasures to fight back.
China talking tough ahead of the Taiwanese president's meeting today with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, saying it would take resolute countermeasures if the meeting went forward. We've heard language like this before. Today on cue, Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense spotted a Chinese aircraft carrier battle group entering Taiwan's southeastern waters just before the bipartisan meeting kicked off. Joining us now, Charles Krulak, retired four-star general, former commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps. General, we thank you for your time today. I wonder your thoughts at the site of this Chinese carrier battle group. Is it more of the same or something you're concerned about?
I think it's more of the same. I think your previous guest really hit the nail on the head. President Tsai has been to the U.S. some 6 times, very low key. I expected some action and wasn't surprised when the aircraft carrier sortied. But you have other things that are ongoing in Taiwan, in China right now, to include President Macron's visit. So I don't think it's going to reach any significant stage. What I do think is important is to talk about national defense and national defense strategy that was recently released that set up China as the pacing threat. At the same time, they mentioned Russia, North Korea, Iran, and then they used the terms of various state and non-state actors. In other words, they're talking about threats around the globe. Too often recently, we keep on looking at China as maybe a regional issue, a regional threat. It is a global threat with global ambitions. Their Belt and Road strategy has been going on since 2013. They've touched 151 countries. They've proven to be very, very capable and very successful in spreading their influence around the world.
Well, General, if we could just speak about China's capabilities for a moment in their Navy, which has grown rapidly. Is the U.S. Navy up to snuff in this theater in particular where we are talking about this posturing taking place?
Yes. Let me just tell you, the Navy submarine service, the quality of the submarines that are out there right now, if the whistle blew, they would be extremely effective. On top of that, you have the Air Force with long-range bombers with long-range missiles. You have the Army's joint missile defense organization that's out there. So, yes, the primary actor, though, initially will be the Navy. Their subs will bottle up ports. They will take out the Chinese Navy, and there's no question in my mind that that'll take place.
Yeah. To put a finer point on it, General, I want to just refer back to this letter that brings us back to the beginning of February from an Air Force general by the name of Mike Minahan. Sent a letter to his people that was leaked to the media suggesting that we could be in an armed conflict with China, a possible war with China as soon as 2025, telling his members to get ready for such an event. Is he close to the truth?
Well, there's a lot of very, very highly classified information that would be tied to that. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think that we're facing that time frame.
Yeah. It's only 2 years away.
Yeah, 2 years away. I think we need to understand that the principal foreign policy move of Xi is the Belt and Road. He's not going to risk all that he's achieved to date by getting themselves into a war with the United States and all the other allies in the area. That's a simple fact.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned allies, General, because we have seen in the war in Ukraine, for example, the West, if we can call it that, the U.S., our European allies, wider NATO, which is now even larger than it was just 2 days ago, united on that front. Would there be that same unification when it comes to any kind of potential conflict with China, or is this largely something that the U.S. has to stand alone in, given how economically sensitive Europe is to China, for example?
No, I don't think we're going to have to stand alone with it. I think we're going to have our allies. The thing that we need to remember is that, and you mentioned it, there are threats all around the world. I don't want to get too deep into the Marine Corps right now, but the fact of the matter is we've taken massive cuts in our capability. We've been ever since the Barbary Pirates, we've been the nation's 911 force. The second session of the 82nd Congress said, you are most ready when the nation is least ready. So all of a sudden, we've taken all these cuts. So the military force that's used most extensively initially has been the Marine Corps, and our ability to do that now has been reduced. We kicked down the door. The chainmail fist of the military is the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. We recognize that. We kicked down the door, but if you don't have the capability to kick it down, you're in trouble. And it's a national security issue. It is not just a Marine Corps issue.
You led a platoon and 2 rifle companies in the Vietnam War, General. What would you tell a young person today getting into the military a day after the former president of the United States says we're closer than ever to a nuclear World War III?
Well, first off, that's not going to help recruiting. I'll tell you that right now.
No, it's not.
One of the major strategic issues we face, probably the major, is the lack of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines signing up. We are not getting the troops we need, and more importantly, we're not taking effective use of our influencers, the mothers, the fathers, the grandparents, the pastors, the school teachers, you name it. You can't just throw out, hey, we're going to be in a nuclear war and expect the influencers to help bring in the sons and daughters of America into the armed forces. And it's a dangerous type of conversation to have.
Well, it's an important message, General. We appreciate your time. Retired Marine Corps General, former Commandant of the Marine Corps, Charles Krulak, with us here on Balance of Power. You chose the right moment to join us now on Bloomberg. We're going to go back to California for an important conversation with Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern and a special guest in Simi Valley. Anne-Marie?
Thanks so much, Joe. An unprecedented moment. We have Speaker McCarthy sitting down with Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen on U.S. soil, and the Speaker joins me now. Thank you so much for joining Bloomberg TV.
Well, thanks for being here.
So China has come out and said this meeting in itself is against the one China policy. Do you think there needs to be more clarity in terms of the policy, to be more strategic, that it's less ambiguous, as some members of your caucus want?
I believe it is. I mean, when you think about the three communiques, but you also have to think, here we are, the Reagan Library. Reagan produced the 6 assurances. And if you read through the 6 assurances, this is exactly what we should be doing. If we want to make sure that we foster democracy and peace and make sure we don't get into any type of conflict, people need to sit down. And what China needs to understand is they can't dictate who a Speaker of the House can meet with, maybe with foe or friend. For the same moment that Macron's sitting down with President Xi, I think that's great. I would sit down with President Xi. I think
is that a trip here? Thinking Beijing?
I would gladly. I've been there 3 times. I think it's important that we meet together. And one of the things I think that America has failed upon is that we've never spoken with one voice when it comes to China. We've gone from administration to administration. So when I became Speaker, we created this select committee. And had 146 Democrats vote for it. You've watched Democrats and Republicans here together. I think that would even foster a stronger relationship with China, because China would understand where our boundaries are. They won't worry about, one party saying something. You've watched in Congress this year, our only movement when we spoke about China, we spoke 100% of members of Congress voted for that resolution against the balloon.
It's the one area, really, of bipartisanship, I'd say.
Well, I think we're getting more, but...
Okay, well, that's I guess,
83% of every bill we passed have been bipartisan. So.
I want to ask you about what type of support there would be, though, if there was to be an invasion. If Beijing were to invade, you talked about arms sales here that need to get there quicker, but what would that look like? Just militarily, or would you send American lives?
See, this is a hypothetical question we would never want to get to. So what you're looking at, what we're doing today is, how do we make sure that question never comes to fruition? So what you would learn from Ukraine itself, because if we're looking back on Ukraine in 2015, when I went to the White House to advocate with President Biden to sell javelins, you want deterrent. You want them not to be able to come in. And that's the same thing we're talking now. In those 6 assurances, we provided that we would continue to fund weapons to Taiwan. But what we should do is speed up that process, that they can defend themselves so you don't have conflict, you don't have war, you communicate with one another. We build greater technology from sciences to health with them. I think that fosters a safer world. We continue to advocate here at the Reagan Library, democracy, freedom, peace, and that's what Taiwan has.
When it comes to Ukraine, though, there are some in your caucus, in the Republican Party, who are wavering. They don't want to send all this support. Where do you think those votes would be if it came to sending that type of support to Taipei?
Well, let me be really clear here. What we're founding in Ukraine is we want to see a path that we can win, not that you just send a check, but what we're watching that's happening in America today, it looks a lot like 1936. You're having from China to Russia to North Korea to Iran coming together like an axis of power. So as Americans, you want to be able to foster that nothing comes to an element of what we watched in the past that history has taught us. So no, I think in our party, you would find that we would fund so Ukraine would win. Because the same aspect would be that would probably deter any action in Taiwan. But what we can learn from the actions of Ukraine, don't wait till conflict happens. Be able to sell the weapons now so there is never conflict.
There's even a bill potentially of outlining what the sanctions would look like. Did Tsai Ing-wen invite you to Taiwan?
No, we didn't talk anything about that.
When are you planning to go? That's what everyone wants to know.
You know what? I just got on the job. I'm not even in 100 days, so I don't have plans to go someplace else.
But you'd like to?
Look, I love the ability of one day maybe I could go, but what I'm looking at right now is the idea of building America's economy. How do I bring down the energy costs for Americans? How do I make our streets safer? How do we secure the border to stop fentanyl from coming across? Now, those are places we're going to differ with Democrats, but we are united here, and we had Republicans and Democrats together speaking with one voice, which I think will make the world safer and make sure we don't have conflict.
Another item on that to-do list you have is the debt ceiling.
Yes.
Right now, you and the White House are having this standoff. If President Joe Biden does not come to the table for these negotiations, will you put that bill on the floor? Will you pass a bill regarding the debt ceiling?
What type of bill do you want? We're never going to move a bill that just raises the debt ceiling.
Well, you want fiscal
I've been
cuts.
very clear with the president. I mean, think about what the Congressional Budget Office has said, right? We're going to pay in the next 10 years $10.5 trillion just in interest.
More than our defense budget.
Well, since 1940 till today, in 83 years, we've only spent $9 trillion on interest. We're about to be at the tipping point, 120% of GDP. We've never been here with the amount of debt that we had since World War II. So what I've told the president is, listen, we're bringing in more revenue than at any time in the history of America, but we're spending more than any time. So we've got to curve that. What we can do is we can build our economy, make it stronger. We can put in work requirements. We can cap how fast government grows.
So are you going to put this all in a bill?
Yes,
and try
I will.
to pass it in the House?
Pass it.
When?
Unfortunately, I tried to sit down with the president, and the president doesn't want to communicate. We're out of session right now. When we come back, you might make some news.
Okay, so, we get back to session, maybe a timeline. Do you have any plans to talk to Wall Street? Because there are starting to grow some concerns.
Yeah, they should be concerned, because I sat down with the president on February 1st, and the president never wants to meet. And what's interesting...
So is all of your communications or just these letters?
Yeah, I'm very concerned about the debt ceiling. I want to make sure that we don't have conflict. And you've watched with the Democrats spending so much that brought us inflation, and now we have issues in banking.
Under the Trump administration, it was a clean raise 3 times.
Well, let's be very clear about this. They added $5.9 trillion since they came in. Remember what Milton Friedman said. I'm sure he's your favorite economist. Only one place can...
I can't have a favorite economist. I work at Bloomberg.
But you know what? There's only one place that can create inflation: government. They spent too much. You watch it, their inflation reduction, now you're finding it costs 3 times as much as they said. And they increased discretionary spending by 30%. When we were in power 8 years, we didn't increase it $1. We decreased it $10 million. And now they've got a banking issue because they raised interest rates. So we want to make the economy our focus.
The Fed raised interest rates. I'm just
Well, you have to, because you know what Milton Friedman also said?
Because inflation is very high. But part of that has to be with stop and starting the economy.
Remember what Milton Friedman said. You can only cure inflation if the interest rate is higher than inflation. But remember what this administration said, that inflation was transitory. Yellen actually had to apologize. And then what we watched, he attacked on the energy policy of America. So the cost went up, which added greater inflation. Then watch what they had done on foreign policy, the missteps in Afghanistan that now made the world less safe, that our friends are now going to China. Now what also happened, too, in this aspect of what is happening, we're watching that OPEC is now raising the price of oil because they're cutting production, because America has cut productions. And we would make global emissions lower if we gave more of America production, because our natural gas is cleaner. If we took away Russian natural gas for 1 year, you would cut 218 million tons of CO2 emission in 1 year. So if you want to lower global emissions...
So you want to sanction Russian natural gas?
No. What I want to do is let America unshackle what's holding us back. We produce the natural gas, which is 41% cleaner than Russia, and sell it around the world.
But you said you're going to talk to Wall Street.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Well, with Wall Street, I want to be very straight and forward with them. We can't continue down the path that we are right now. The CBO says if nothing happens, the trust funds of the highway, Medicare, and Social Security, they're going to get cut based upon the president. He's cutting those programs. And
the president doesn't want to cut them in his budget, though.
What the president is cutting them, because what happens is they go broke in the next 2 years because he increased spending by $5.9 trillion. You can't afford it. And I don't want to do that. I want to save them. So we have to spend less money than we spent before. Let's put in work requirements. Let's cap the future of what our spending in the future.
So this potentially is going to be part of the bill. I also need to ask about the news yesterday. Of course, the former President Donald Trump, 34 felony charges. Republicans say this is a weak case that Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney, brought forward. And I was there at the court actually yesterday.
You fly fast.
I do. If it's a weak case, then why not just let the legal system work as it does for Americans every single day?
You know what's so interesting? You say Republicans say that. You know Democrats...
And some Democrats say that.
No, not just some, a lot. Cuomo said that. The New York Times. Everybody knows this is a weak case. Everybody knows this is political. But what's really happening here, if we sit back, remember, this is not an attorney general of a state. This is not even the DA of New York City. He's a borough DA who ran on a campaign that he was going to indict the president. He ran on a campaign getting money from Soros. This is what's going to cause damage. You just watched today Republicans and Democrats sitting together talking about a serious issue. Then you watched a political person go out and try to sue a former president who's running again and bring politics into it. So what's going to happen? Are we going to find a small DA from a small county in a red state start to sue Biden when he leaves office? That's not America. America believes in the rule of law. And the way he's stretching this, everybody knows this is not a real case. So I think for the health of America, listen to the Republicans and Democrats alike and stop playing politics with our law.
Just one final question. You mentioned, obviously, it's not just a former president. He is the front runner for 2024. Would you welcome more individuals getting involved in this race for 2024?
Look, everybody can make their own decision there. I think there's going to be a lot of people running on both sides of the aisle. I don't know that President Biden hasn't.
But what is your decision?
Well,
Do you think there should be more people?
President Biden hasn't even announced yet. And there's a lot. You got the governor of California traveling to other states. He runs to the White House when the president's out of town. So there's a lot of people questioning whether Biden even runs. I think a lot of people are going to campaign.
But you're a party.
And I think democracy is good. I think ideas are good, and people can get out and talk about it.
Speaker Kevin McCarthy, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That was Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy here in his home state, California, for an unprecedented sit-down with Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen.
All right, Anne-Marie Hordern out there in California with the speaker. Thank you so much. A wide-ranging conversation there, Joe.
Covered it all.
Covering it all, the debt ceiling, the indictment of former President Trump, but speaking from California after a historic meeting with the president of Taiwan and the speaker.
Just on the heels of this meeting, really interesting that he said they didn't even discuss a trip to Taiwan. And he said, hey, I've only been here for 100 days. What do you want from me? But we remember when he was running for speaker, he said one of the first things he would do was bring a bipartisan CODEL to Taiwan. We've asked a lot of lawmakers who heard that as well and have said they'd like to join him, but it looks like it's not happening anytime soon.
Well, and the Taiwan government would rather that it perhaps not happen soon because they do have an election coming up. We know they asked the speaker not to visit Taipei and rather have this conversation on U.S. soil because the ongoing concern here is around provocation of Beijing and the reaction you may see from China and more specifically the People's Liberation Army because we saw what drills were happening after Nancy Pelosi's visit last year.
Now the emergence of an aircraft carrier battle group in the area reminds us of what's possible. And there have been questions about, maybe this is a dress rehearsal for whatever the next visit might be to Taiwan. Remembering, it's not just the speaker. The governor of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, is preparing a trade mission, as they call it, to Taiwan. And there are going to be a lot more where that came from.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. So let's get back to Anne-Marie Hordern, who just, of course, finished that conversation with Speaker Kevin McCarthy. So, Anne-Marie, can we realistically buy there is no trip in the works?
At the moment, there is no trip, and that's coming from the speaker himself. They did have this unprecedented sit-down here in California, obviously very symbolic, as this is the first time a Taiwanese president sat with someone of this stature. This is the third highest ranking U.S. government official. We also need to look a little bit into what's going on in Taiwan. The internal politics. There is going to be election in January and potentially a fiery trip is how Beijing would view another Speaker of the House coming to Taipei, and that might not work in Tsai Ing-wen's favor, and potentially the U.S. wants to make sure they're removing themselves from that situation. So if I was a betting individual, and I'm not, I would say potentially after January of next year would be when they would start to look at this. But I think given this bipartisanship today that you saw here at the Reagan Library, and what Speaker McCarthy said to me is after this, there's a lot of other issues that him and his party want to focus on.
Anne-Marie, bring us into this meeting a little bit more here. You're in this beautiful location in Simi Valley, the Reagan Presidential Library. What's the feel of this delegation? We know that there are Democrats, in fact, members of the leadership like Pete Aguilar are there. I think you mentioned that Congressman Seth Moulton, who's on the Select China Committee, is there. Does this have a feel of bipartisanship, or is this a Republican event?
No, this definitely has a feel of bipartisanship. There's a number of Democrats here, as you mentioned, Peter Aguilar and Seth Moulton. These individuals are here to make sure they are standing alongside, as Americans, really, that they are bolstering their support for Taiwan. And you heard the speaker come out and say that arms sales to Taiwan, that needs to continue, and it needs to go faster. There's also a bill floating in Congress right now that they want to outline what the sanctions would look like on Communist Party officials, on Chinese companies, financial industry, if Beijing were to invade. And that has to really play into the comment Speaker McCarthy made to me about the fact that they want to learn from Ukraine and use some of those provisions and actions as a deterrent to Beijing, and so to put them on warning of potential any ideas they would have about uniting and invading Taiwan.
All right, Anne-Marie Hordern out there in Simi Valley, California, thank you so much. And again, great interview with the House Speaker. Let's get more reaction now to that conversation and really just what took place today at this historic meeting between the Speaker of the House and the President of Taiwan. Joining us now is Bloomberg's Deputy Managing Editor, Wendy Benjaminson. So there is a question of whether or not any deliverables actually came out of the meeting today. If no trip has been scheduled or even was discussed, what was the point? What was achieved?
I think the point was, one, domestically, politically, Kevin McCarthy got to do what Nancy Pelosi did. Mm-hmm. I think there's also the point of just the meeting taking place, as I think Anne-Marie said. The meeting took place, and that's what's important. That's the message that is being delivered to China, is that no matter if there's a Democrat or a Republican in that job, they support Taiwan, they're going to meet with them, and, don't worry about your aircraft carrier group so much.
Speaker McCarthy is going to have a great time out there. He gets massive publicity around this. A lot of thumbs up. Looks bipartisan, to Anne-Marie's point. What's the administration response going to be now? They had podiums set up in front of Ronald Reagan's Air Force One. They're at an incredibly formal setting here with lawmakers from both parties making the trip out there. I know they're meeting with other people, but this smacks of a formal visit. How long can we, do this transiting the U.S. dance?
I think they're going to do that dance as long as they possibly can. And I think the administration probably applauds the sort of bipartisan nature of it. Nancy Pelosi, who, as we know, went to Taiwan to meet with officials there, she actually sent out a supportive statement just a few minutes ago congratulating.
How about it?
In Pelosi's very sort of sidelong way, yes, congratulating McCarthy for the bipartisan nature of it. And we heard the White House make similar sounds earlier today. So I think this is a rare moment where the United States government is united.
Well, and to that point, we heard the Speaker speaking with Anne-Marie about issues in which there is very much no unification, partisan issues like the debt ceiling or the arrest yesterday of former President Trump. How much do those domestic kerfuffles color the focus on geopolitics?
Well, I think they can enjoy the moment and then go back to squabbling, which is exactly what happened in the interview with Anne-Marie. The debt ceiling fight is at a standstill. Other issues are at a standstill. Donald Trump is looming over the whole thing. So, yes, they're going to go right back to politics. They already are going back to politics in the interview.
Wendy, thank you, as always. Wendy Benjaminson with us here in our Bloomberg bureau in Washington, D.C. Coming up, we'll get more reaction to the interview with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy that Anne-Marie just brought us from California. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy just finished speaking to our colleague Anne-Marie Hordern out in California after meeting the leader of Taiwan. He said he has no plans to visit the island. Joining us now to discuss are Lauren Tomlinson. She is partner at Steer PR, and Raul Avilar. He is Executive Vice President at Resolute Public Affairs. So, Lauren, if I could just start with you. Obviously, it was Speaker McCarthy who was leading this today, but there were members of Congress there, both Republican and Democrat. There seems to be a sense of bipartisanship around this issue in particular. But bipartisanship doesn't always mean progress or anything tangible comes of it. What can we expect out of this relationship moving forward?
So I do think it's notable that the single issue that is garnering so much bipartisan support is China, and more specifically, the U.S.'s relationship and reaction to some of the CCP's aggression. And what was really noticeable about McCarthy's visit and the delegation that he had with him in California today was that the Select Committee on China was there with him. Chairman Mike Gallagher was there, all of the Democratic counterparts, huge show of bipartisan support for Taiwan from that committee. And I think that committee in particular is going to be important for what you were just saying, if there's going to be any action, because there's going to be a lot of policy recommendations that come out of that committee. And it has such bipartisan support that we can expect those recommendations, I think, to actually result in something, right? To result in some sort of legislation, to result in a different posture from the American government towards the CCP. And again, our support for Taiwan. I think the Taiwanese president being there and everything that they discussed, some of it's a little symbolic, right? Like we want to just show China that we're not going to do exactly what they say. But then some of it really is like we need to, make sure that there is strong democracy and we have allies in that area.
Raul, what do you think of no trip? I was struck to hear Kevin McCarthy say they didn't even talk about it, knowing he promised to make a bipartisan codel if he became speaker. There's nothing on the books, though.
Right. I find it interesting as well, particularly because, if we're going to forge the relationship that we need to forge with Taiwan as an ally that we have, we need to, I think, go and visit. It's an important piece that needs to happen so that we can fully understand and know what the situation is. And actually, it demonstrates to the Chinese and to the world that we're serious about this and making sure that the relationship is strong. So I agree.
You say that it needs to signal seriousness and, I guess, to a certain degree, clarity. But do you feel that there really is clarity on the part of the Biden administration about what the policy is around Taiwan? Is it strategic ambiguity? Is it still the one China policy?
Well, I mean, there's a lot that we have to evaluate and to look at to see where we go. And I mean, every day policy changes, and as we know that this is a fast-moving issue. But yeah, I think that the Biden administration is strong on the issue and is actually showing support for the Taiwanese. So yes, I do.
What do you think, Lauren? Does the White House need to do some catching up with the Hill on this? You've got lawmakers of both stripes out in California sort of celebrating this moment in time here, while the White House won't even call it a visit. It's a transit. There's nothing to see here. We don't want conflict. We want competition. It sounds like two different narratives from each end of Pennsylvania Avenue to a point.
Yeah, you have to remember that the government, looking at our diplomatic relations with China and obviously not wanting to just go into a full-scale war, there's going to be a balance between Congress being allowed to be aggressive in their language and meeting with the Taiwanese and making this show. There's going to be a little bit of support from the administration, right? You saw the Secretary of State going out today saying that, we support the Taiwanese and their pursuit of their democracy. But we don't know how China is going to retaliate. The Chinese embassy has already put Congress on notice that, don't do this visit. It's going to be, that we're going to react. Last time Speaker Pelosi went to Taiwan, they obviously shot missiles, right? Yeah. Like there was a real reaction. So I think that that's actually what the administration, what the Biden administration is going to be kind of hedging against, right, is they need to have a softer approach to preserve just, us not going into full-scale war, but also what's China going to do? And I think that's kind of the next step, right? What are you going to do? And then we're going to have to decide, what the reaction will be from the U.S. government.
You said exactly. I sense you nodding.
Absolutely. I mean, what is going to happen, and what is that reaction going to be, right?
They could blockade Taiwan. We already saw a dress rehearsal for that. Do we really want to know what China's going to do?
Right. So that's going to be all taken into account through the State Department and through with the White House and the administration, and we'll have to see what goes next and how it happens.
Where realistically, though, do you think geopolitics is on the priority list for this administration, for this Congress, considering everything else that was going on? We were just hearing Speaker McCarthy talking about the debt ceiling, which is still unresolved.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an important issue, obviously, because we're dealing with issues with China going to visit with Putin and so on and so forth, and so. Taiwan is an ally of ours, and it is an important key ally in the geopolitical arena. So I think it is an important. But yes, we do have other issues, but this is one that I think ranks pretty high.
Many thanks to our panel. Great talk. Lauren Tomlinson back with us, partner at Steer PR, along with Raul Avalar, Executive Vice President at Resolute Public Affairs. Coming up, we're going to look at the fallout from Donald Trump's indictment on 34 felony counts. And then, of course, the speech last night from Mar-a-Lago. It's ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. Thanks for joining us. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons. Former President Donald Trump's legal drama is expected to continue soon in Georgia. This after pleading not guilty to 34 felony counts at his arraignment yesterday in New York. We've got a lot to talk about with Chris Mattei, attorney at Koskoff and Beater. Welcome, Chris. It's great to see you. I want to ask you first about the story in New York and, of course, the indictment yesterday. What's Team Trump's next move? Is it to dismiss? Is it to move the trial? Is it to get a new judge, or all of them?
Joe, thanks for having me. What we saw yesterday was just the very beginning of what I expect will be a long criminal proceeding. And I think what you'll see out of Donald Trump's team is an effort to get more definition around the charges in the indictment. You'll recall that what has converted all of these offenses into felonies is this idea that Trump arranged for false entries to be made in order to commit another offense. Well, the indictment doesn't exactly specify what those other offenses are. And so I think the first thing the defense is going to want to do is force the DA to specify what the underlying offenses are. That may give them different ways to challenge the legal sufficiency of the indictment, which is what I think they want to do before ever getting to a jury.
Well, Chris, that's on the defense side. On the prosecution side, speaking yourself as a prosecutor, how hard is Alvin Bragg's job here, given that the evidence we know of, many say, doesn't necessarily seem to suggest this case is particularly strong?
Well, I think it's important to remember that we actually don't know what all of the evidence is. Alvin Bragg decided to put a fairly bare bones indictment out there. And so I think it's fair to assume, given the stakes in this case, that the DA has what he believes sufficient evidence to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. The reality is that these cases do get charged and prosecuted every day in New York. Here, I think there's going to be obviously additional scrutiny on the charges. But if the DA can prove that Donald Trump knew that these false entries were being made and that they weren't for legal services, the payments that is, but were for payoffs to Stormy Daniels, and knew that that was being done in order to protect his electoral chances or with the expectation that Michael Cohen would file false tax returns, that case is going to be sufficient to support a conviction. I just think we don't know what all the evidence is going to be. We know that Michael Cohen will be a witness. We know that Michael Pecker, Stormy Daniels would be witnesses. And so it's unclear at this point kind of just how the case is going to stack up.
I wonder what this does and how this informs people's reaction to some of the other cases out there, Chris. We mentioned Georgia on the way into this conversation. We've also got a special counsel, both of whom Donald Trump talked about last night. If the public decides that this is a political case or a weaponizing of the law, what does that mean for the other two cases when they emerge?
Well, I think it's difficult to know. I mean, it's quite clear that Donald Trump's public strategy here is to lump all these prosecutions together as politically motivated and illegitimate. On the other hand, that's not going to stop these processes from moving forward. And so if the DA in Georgia and the special counsel come out with criminal charges, I think it's going to be very, very difficult to make the case that 3 different prosecutors and 3 different grand juries, all of whom are comprised of neutral members of the public, are somehow doing something that they're not allowed to do. But in any event, Donald Trump is going to have all the due process that's afforded to every criminal defendant and will have every opportunity to make his claims before a jury that these cases don't have evidence to support them. Ultimately, it's going to be the jury's decision here. And those members of the jury are going to be drawn from an impartial pool, and they're not going to be affected by any of these arguments about political motivation or otherwise. They're going to be asked to consider the evidence.
Chris, thanks for joining us with your insights. Chris Mattei, attorney at Koskoff and Beater. Interesting conversation. There's still so much we don't know.
And this is going to be drawn out over a long time, not just in this case, but we're still waiting for the others.
That's why you want to stay with us here on Bloomberg TV. That's it for us, Balance of Power. For Anne-Marie Hordern in California, Kaylee Lyons in Washington, I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.